Welcome to episode 2 in this introduction to phenomenology for beginners. My aim in this series is to give you a sense of what it's like to inhabit a phenomenological attitude. I'm focusing on phenomenology as a way of seeing. My premise is that a phenomenological perspective will be radically new for most of you. And despite all the ideas you're going to be hearing about from me, I'm not making a mostly theoretical claim as much as an experiential one. And this means that what I'm saying can only be verified by you yourself, personally. So my purpose here is to give you the flavor of this perspective. There are libraries full of brilliant philosophy, as well as excellent texts in phenomenological psychology, some of which I'll be pointing you toward along the way. I personally inhabit this tradition in a hands-on way, based on my daily work with people as a counselor, as a coach, and as a researcher. And in my life as a practitioner, it's this hands-on application that's the proving ground for verifying the value of phenomenology. And fortunately, there are plenty of strictly scholarly presentations available online for those of you with that appetite. But for me, I'm going to be much more practice-based. So, in episode 1, I made a distinction that I'm going to keep repeating in different ways throughout this series, and that's this. In working with people, there's a critical difference between explanation on the one hand and understanding on the other. This distinction is famously associated with Wilhelm Dilthey, a founding figure in the development of the social sciences. Dilthey argued that the sciences of nature, like chemistry or meteorology, seek to produce cause and effect explanations of natural phenomena, whereas the sciences of human being, like history, psychology, or anthropology, instead aim to arrive at understandings of the meaning of human phenomena for us. And meaningfulness is not reducible to a sequence of cause and effect relations or measurable variables. I'll repeat, not reducible to a sequence of cause and effect relations. To reduce the meaningful texture of human being to just measurable cause and effect relations would be to employ the Procrustean bed that I spoke about last time. So, what's the alternative to a natural scientific, mathematical, calculative approach to understanding human being? Do we just end up collapsing into the touchy-feeliness of individual self-reports with no ability to make careful discriminations? If we don't approach human beings like measurable objects that fit into the Procrustean bed of the natural sciences, is everything just up for grabs, just a matter of personal opinion? In other words, is phenomenology, as a representative of human science, an example of what's often called subjectivism? The way I'm using that term here is to refer to a strong version of subjectivism, defined as the claim that truth, meaning, and values are entirely determined by individual human subjectivity. Let me repeat that. A strong subjectivist would claim that truth, meaning, and values are entirely determined by individual human subjectivity. So notice the emphasis on the isolated individual. In other words, you're totally on your own. It's completely up to you to determine what's true, what's meaningful, what has value. For a strong subjectivist, there are no shared reliable truths, no reliable meanings, and no reliable values that transcend my individual opinions and preferences. This perspective leaks into pop culture and leads to statements in everyday English like, "That's my reality," or "Speak your truth." All right, well, what's wrong with "speak your truth"? Well, there's nothing wrong with it as slang. But if we think about it, "speak your truth" implies something totally different from "share your perspective." Share your perspective is an invitation to express your unique point of view in relation to a shared reality that we inhabit together. Not incommensurable private realities that each of us has in a private bubble all by ourselves. See? So now we'll talk about this later in the series, but Edmund Husserl's whole phenomenological project was to found a rigorous approach to the study of consciousness that escapes getting trapped in either the naive objectivism of assuming the existence of a world outside of our consciousness that's just somehow out there, even though we have no direct contact with it, on the one hand, and escapes the subjectivism of collapsing our ability to understand the world into a mere matter of personal preference and private opinion. Okay, so back to understanding versus explanation. This distinction is not meant as a good versus bad one. Okay, it's not good versus bad. So follow where I'm going here. Let's say I'm in dialogue with another person, whether as a friend, as a counselor, or as a scientific researcher. If I'm aiming to understand their experience, I'm in a different attitude from trying to explain their experience. I'm not saying these are mutually exclusive, antithetical attitudes, but I want to convey the difference, so I'm going to dramatize this distinction in order to argue that understanding and explaining are different modes of relating to the other person. Let's clarify the sense of these two words, understand and explain. When you hear the words understand and explain, you might say, well, don't these amount to the same thing? If I understand something, then I'm able to explain it, right? And if I can explain something, then obviously I understand it. Yeah. In everyday English, we do talk that way. But I want to get more precise. I'm going to stick to the following simplified definitions based on Dilthey, who I mentioned earlier. To explain means seek to make sense of what's going on with the other person in a particular way, in terms of impersonal cause and effect relationships and scientific laws. So that's explanation. In contrast, to understand is to carefully attend to the qualitative aspects of what the other person is going through as a person. Qualitative is another important word that I'm going to keep repeating in this series. Qualitative refers to the qualia. That's the Latin word meaning the what it's like aspect of an experience. So to understand the other person, I attend to the qualitative aspect, the what it's like for them aspect, in order to arrive at an understanding of the meaning of an experience for the other person. And as you're going to see in this series, as a phenomenologist, when I'm listening for the what it's like dimension of someone's story, I'm not listening for merely idiosyncratic or quirky meanings that are exclusive to that individual person alone in isolation. No, nor am I taking the what's it like of their story as somehow inviolate, unquestionable gospel about how the world really is. Instead, I'm listening to their story as a personal expression that tells me something about a more broadly human experience. Let's say you're talking to someone who's going through some difficulties, or it could even be someone who's ecstatically happy. It works either way. If what you communicate is that you're seeking to understand the meaning of what's going on for them, that turns out to be dramatically different from communicating that you're trying to explain what's going on with them, why it's happening the way it is. Different for you and different for them. Let me give you a concrete example. I'm with someone who has suffered the loss of a loved one. How is understanding different from explaining? It's different for the other person because as they start to share their story of losing a loved one, if they're paying any attention at all to me, they'll quickly get that if I'm here to understand them, then I'm available to accompany, receive, and stay with the way they spontaneously tell me their story of loss in whatever way they do. I'm seeking, as my colleague Magnus Englander has astutely written, to follow the meaning of the experience for them. If instead I'm here to explain their experience of loss, then my interest and attention is much narrower. I could even say instrumental, because I'm listening for whatever I can seize upon in their story to piece together my own story of causes and effects. My own agenda is to turn their story into this chain of causes and effects, which means I'm already trying to jump to a theoretical account of their story that's explanatory. In contrast, as a phenomenologist, the substance of their story isn't merely raw material that enables me to come up with an explanation. And I'll say much more about how phenomenological analysis unfolds in the future. Likewise, as I've said before, in listening to them, my attention does not collapse into merely focusing on the idiosyncratic or particular details of their story about losing someone they loved, because I'm trusting that through my careful attending to their particular story and its meaning for them, I can not only follow the particulars of their story, but I can also discern something more essential about what the phenomenon of losing a loved one means as a more broadly human experience. So what I'm aiming at here is to give you a sense of the difference between a phenomenological attitude and the normal attitude of the natural sciences. In upcoming episodes, I'm going to be claiming that the natural science attitude is one we absorb without even thinking about it by virtue of growing up in societies shaped by centuries of highly successful natural science that has obviously reshaped the world we live in. But for now, consider what questions this understanding versus explanation distinction raises for you. Is it clarifying? Mystifying? Does it grate on your desire to explain things? All of that is grist for the mill and part of encountering a new perspective. Thanks for your attention, and see you next time.